I strongly recommend the Halo TV show for everyone. At the very least, even if you hate it, you need to watch it to be able to keep up with the memes. The Halo TV show has officially completed, and oh boy, is the reception all over the place. Prior to the show debuting, we had already done a deep dive into the rocky pre-production of the show, so going into the show, our expectations were already realigned, but wow. With all 9 episodes concluding of the Halo TV series, Luke and I decided to come out of our Halo retirement to talk about Season 1. Now, I could jump on the bandwagon and talk about how I think the show is completely awful, but I would be lying to myself if I said there was nothing redeemable about the show. Our feelings are very mixed, and having an affinity for Halo makes the highs and the lows feel even more extreme. Because when something cool happens, it's awesome, and when some dumb stuff happens, you're left questioning reality. So there's definitely a lot to unpack with the show, and I think there's something a lot of people aren't talking about, specifically within the characters themselves, so we wanted to take a closer look. But we're not fully ruling out the fact that there is still hope that the show could get better in the future, which we'll talk about more later on. But first, we need to understand one important thing, that Master Chief in the video games and Master Chief in the television show are 2 different characters, and one of them likely eats really good, healthy, high-quality ramen, and the other one probably eats that low-brand stuff that's not that great anyways. Yeah, fortunately, we're able to make this video because it's sponsored by Vite Ramen, that has supported our channel through this trying time for Halo, and they sponsored today's video. And Vite Ramen is literally known for having a great reputation in the gaming community. They've done some really awesome things lately. Their ramen is healthy and it tastes great. What more is there to say here? Right now, when you order a bundle, you get $25 of free stuff included in your bundle. And seriously, 2022 is a big year for Vite Ramen. They're becoming really popular and everything's in really high demand. So you might notice in the store some things are between limited quantities and some made to order status. So you definitely want to jump on and get your orders placed as soon as possible so you could be eating this great ramen quickly too. Once again, a huge thank you to the guys at Vite Ramen for supporting our content, sponsoring Rocket Sloth, and of course, providing our audience with some cool ramen. Okay, let's go ahead and jump back into this. Okay, going back into the television series, I've thoroughly enjoyed the experience of watching each episode of Halo. And I see this argument all over the place, especially when people are critical about the show on like Twitter. Hey, if you don't like it, don't watch it. I see this sentiment, and especially from the people who really do enjoy the show, but I actually think this does not apply to the Halo television series. You can enjoy something that you don't like, and that's okay too. You can enjoy the experience of watching the show, even if you think the show is a train wreck. The show manages to be everything and nothing at the same time, and I think that's why the community is really split on it. But more recently, it seems like existing fans are leaning towards nah, while the more casual audience is maybe kind of enjoying it. I mean, the show was deemed successful and they've greenlit the show for Season 2 already. But how can one even articulate what exactly the first season is? I've been struggling to think about how to even talk about this season and explain how this season even exists for a little bit, and the best way I can think about it is, you know how Marvel has the What If series on Disney Plus? I feel like the Halo show is existing somewhere like that. It's an alternate, non-canon timeline where the producers of the show take the existing Halo universe and ask, what if we change some random things just to see what it's like? I think this was always the first roadblock that turned a lot of people off from the show, and I think this continues throughout the length of the entire series. What if Master Chief wasn't the one from Canon, but some other character with the same name, but without the hard, pragmatic personality? What if we did a Halo episode where Master Chief goes back to his childhood home? What if Master Chief entered a fling with a Covenant human spy? What if Master Chief threatened to kill Halsey? What if Master Chief did a little self-surgery to feel emotions again? What if our Halsey doesn't have the capacity to show remorse for what she's done? What if we make a character that's this little creepy assistant guy that just stares at this clone in a really awkward way, and then we never touch base on this again? But of course, the big one they focus in on right away is, what if Master Chief was clearly someone else? And that right there is the starting point. Can you get over that? No? Then enjoy the wild ride, because this show is wild. If you can get over it, just wait, it gets weirder. Honestly, the first episode I was the most forgiving with. I was able to get over the fact that the show would be rewriting a lot of the canon, and I was prepared for it. But I was okay with it because I assumed it would be altered for the sake of translating Halo into a stronger narrative than what the games and the existing universe could provide, in the sake of making the show stronger, not just for the sake of changing things. Luke and I watched through every episode when they came out, and one thing we both noticed the show does really well is a lot of the action sequences. The set pieces and the props are pretty well done, and it leans heavily into the existing lore aesthetic and are familiar and exciting for fans to watch. That first episode of this season served as a hook that was supposed to make people get a taste for what's to come and also set up the existing universe. And I thought, for the most part, as a standalone episode, it was pretty okay. But in the context of the larger story that they went with, it actually ended up being more disruptive than it was beneficial. Let's actually talk about Kwan Ha for a second. This character kicks off the entire show, and the actress Kwan Ha does a fantastic job with this character. I mean, the script could be better, but Kwan feels like a believable character dealing with the mixed emotions of grief in this first episode, and we see the brutality firsthand and understand why this character is kind of going through a rough time. Then we get introduced to Master Chief, and he's ruthless and cool, and he gets the job done, and the first act of this episode mostly works. I was feeling like the importance of Kwan's character really made sense for this first episode and what they were going to do with the show, because we would have this overly emotional Kwan character juxtaposed to Master Chief's colder and calm demeanor. In the games, we've always experienced the story through Master Chief's perspective, as he is this silent and stoic character, but we are literally in his perspective, experiencing the story through him and around him. But since now Master Chief is a more involved character that's shrouded in a lot of mystery, since he'll obviously be dealing with complex and dramatic motives and feelings, Kwan actually felt like a good addition to the show in having a relatable character with everything else that is going to be going on in the plot. This is a device that works in a lot of other TV shows. You could look at The Office with Jim's whole character's existence, or a more serious tone, Jack from the television series Lost. All this supernatural stuff's going down and he's just like, huh? I don't believe it. I don't get it. Neither did any of us watching the show, but we were relating to him. Sure, Kwan may have had some moments that highlighted her immaturity, which could be a great contrast to Master Chief's overly serious tone, and we could see the characters evolve when faced with a struggle for humanity, something that was much bigger than Kwan's scuttle with outer colonies, and that would have been a really awesome arc. But what did they end up choosing to do with Kwan for the rest of the show? I don't know, they just threw her along on some side quest that ultimately felt disjointed and unimportant from the main plot. Matter of fact, this character goes through so much and still doesn't grow from it all until they did a dedicated episode where the writers are like, okay, now you can grow as a character. But I was already feeling that based on everything that she had already gone through in the first couple of episodes alone, how would she not change even the slightest bit on this journey? It takes a mythical, albeit hilarious vision for her to actually wake up. If we look at Master Chief, this is where a lot of people have gotten really critical. I actually really like Pablo Schreiber as Master Chief. I think he captures the demeanor of Chief when he is allowed to pretty accurately. And with or without his helmet, I'm okay with it. I accepted that before the show started, but the writing and the arc for the Master Chief doesn't feel like the Master Chief as a character that we can recognize. And I think the biggest issue fans point to isn't the fact that the plot is making this character act a certain way, it's just the fact that the character change and the shift in how they presented the Master Chief differently doesn't really benefit the show itself. They never actually give Schreiber's Master Chief a chance to exist for a moment before sending him off on some dramatic character arc. In other shows like, say, The Walking Dead, for example, man, remember when that show was good? We were introduced to Rick Grimes, and slowly we see who he is as a person throughout the first season, and we see his character and integrity, and they establish him as a character you can root for. Then in season 3, we see this calloused version of the character after dealing with betrayal and loss, and his character goes through a pretty big self-journey that season that lands him to where his character then is by season 4. Episode 1 of Halo Infinite feels like they're already trying to put Master Chief through a third season level self-exploration of himself without ever letting fans be established to who he is in the first place. Fans of Halo who have a context for who Master Chief is could probably connect the dots to how Chief is changing and who he was based off of their experiences with the video games, but with how severely disconnected the show is and how it seems like it's constantly reminding fans it's not related to the source material, it's like the viewers are being conditioned not to think about the existing lore, which makes Master Chief feel even more disjointed than maybe what he already was. And I think that stops fans from being able to give Master Chief the benefit of the doubt as a character. It takes Master Chief 40-ish minutes into the first episode to disobey direct orders, something we never saw from Master Chief until 11 years into the franchise, which was something that to this day, he's still living with those repercussions in newer entries in the Halo universe. In the show, it was kind of just a slap on the wrist, and then he just continues to disobey orders throughout the following episodes. Actually, back on Twitter, I brought up the argument that a lot of TV show adaptations are in fact disconnected from the original source material lore. Shows like The Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, Orange is the New Black, these shows were all successful, and they're not existing in the original lore. They're their own self-contained universes. But some people actually pointed out that my argument doesn't quite work directly, as in most cases, as these shows progressed into their later seasons, they strayed further and further from their source material, and then the fan reception tanked. I think that's actually a really good point that I hadn't thought about originally, which makes me wonder, where does that leave us when Halo hasn't even started and it's so far detached from the games already? Still, as a Halo fan, there's a lot to absolutely love about the show, and you can like things and dislike other things. You're allowed to do that. For a show that has a television budget, finally seeing action sequences with Spartans and the Covenant is really awesome. And there's only a handful of high-octane moments, but when we do get them, it's pure Halo. And that's awesome. I think the most interesting character that has been taken from the games and really fleshed out so far is definitely Miranda Keyes. If you didn't know the deeper lore of the Halo universe, and say you've only played the games, you wouldn't really make too many connections that Miranda Keyes is the child of two prominent Halo characters. We never see that explored between Halo 2 and Halo 3, and this time around with the show, we have this character who's in an incredibly difficult position, wedged between two drastically different parents who have a direct influence over her career and self-identity. This character has an interesting arc, and maybe, if anything, it's not utilized enough. Considering Kwan and Soren's story already seems irrelevant, they could have maybe stepped up the involvement of Miranda a little bit more. I think in general, the casting of the show was overall really well done. There are some moments where it feels like the actors are struggling to convey things within the script, and sometimes the plot has gone into some weird places. I mean, we have McKee, who is completely disconnected from the Halo lore, but okay, we'll give this character a shot. I think the introduction and the existence of this character is okay. It's different, but maybe they can utilize this character in a way to tell a very unique story. But why is this character relevant, and why should this character exist? It's kind of the mystery early on in the season, and they show her brutally killing all of these people, which kind of took away the mystery of her character, and then they make her romantically involved with the Master Chief, which is already kind of an interesting choice to go through within just a couple episodes of the show, have a love interest for Master Chief, something that's never really been explored in the video games or expanded lore in any way whatsoever. But even the interesting thing, which would be the mystery behind this character and her backstory and what her real intentions are, was already ruined by showing that she's brutally killing all of these UNSC soldiers ahead of time. If we would have found out about that later, after she connects with Master Chief, that could have been a really interesting point of conflict. But instead, since we already knew, it just seems like Master Chief is making more rash and bad decisions rather than building off of why these two characters have this innate attraction to each other. And then we have this version of Catherine Halsey in the television series, which is a little bit of a frustrating character because in the Halo franchise itself, Halsey is one of the more complex characters. There's definitely a lot of different layers. However, in the TV series, we have a very different version of Catherine Halsey. These portrayals of the characters are drastically different. We have a hardened and fierce genius versus a more babbling and scattered genius. Halsey in the games typically has her utilitarian justification conflicted with her own personal remorse and guilt for what she had to do for the Spartan program. But her utility in the plot is usually relevant, as Halsey is typically portrayed as very calculating in nature. Whereas the TV show, this version seems more manipulative and scheming, and driven more by her personal interests, which makes her seem more of an annoying and antagonistic character than the badass, hard-boiled old woman that we actually see in the series.
She created the original Spartans. Master Chief?
No way.
Yeah, story goes, she kidnapped a bunch of kids.
What? What would an old lady like her do with kids?
First, we taught them how to be silent. Then we taught them how to be Spartans.
And then there's a large list of cast members that are there, and they're not necessarily overtly bad characters, but you don't necessarily understand what their purpose serves in this first season or where they're going to go with those characters. I think Soren is probably the easiest example to look at. He's honestly just relevant for a short amount of time and is just kind of shoehorned in as needed. where I think some of the other characters that don't get enough of the spotlight, like some of the members of the Silver team, are actually some of the most interesting characters in the entire series that I really wish they would have shown more of. We did get a little glimpse of what this could look like through the character Kai, and then not too much more was really fleshed out with that, but hopefully we can see that same attention and focus with those characters moving forward, because they are very interesting. I don't know why they didn't choose to zero in on those characters earlier on, but nonetheless, maybe there's still potential for the future. Another really big complaint that obviously shows up with this show and is very commonplace is the fact that the show itself does exist in this Halo world, but we haven't really gotten to the point where there's a retelling of any of the events from the games, the books, or any of the source material, or any plot lines that really carry over from the actual Halo universe. Sure, there's hints and kind of allusions that things are coming and things are going to move along, much like what we would expect from a Halo series, but it definitely is interesting how they chose to make things start so much before any real major events in the Halo universe happen, while actually taking so long to reach a point of a major Halo story arc starting up. I surely thought that we would be seeing the Halo ring play a role in the show, maybe in the second act of the first season, and definitely was not the pace that they were going with this show, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out moving forward. And ultimately, especially with the last episode, we are optimistic that maybe the show could still be turned around in a follow-up season, or at the very least, lay out the groundwork for some other type of Halo adaptation down the road. Nonetheless, I really do enjoy the show, for better and for worse. If the show was more of a train wreck, or becomes more of a train wreck, I think I'm still gonna watch it, for the inverse reasons of maybe why a lot of us started watching it in the first place. But the show does have some redeeming qualities that are cool, and if you can separate the two and just realize when you go into an episode, some of the time it's going to be a fun ride for the right reasons. Some of the time it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a bumpier ride, but it's still a ride that you waited in line for at Disney. Not really. Now, what's really interesting, though, is through this whole process, Luke also has been watching this with me. We've been timing up our view sessions on Discord, and it is interesting to hear Luke's perspective, and he doesn't talk enough on this channel. So, Luke, are you there? Take it away.
Okay, I am here to talk to you about the Halo TV show from my perspective. And usually I don't talk much, but I feel like there was a couple points that I wanted to make that Elijah didn't feel as strong about, so I'm just gonna rant about them for like a couple minutes. It's not gonna be long, I swear. I'm gonna keep it short. So foremost, my biggest gripe with the show was that it didn't feel Halo enough in a lot of spots, right? I felt like there was minute-long sequences where it could have just been any generic sci-fi show. It just didn't feel Halo at all. There was those points where it was just like people in the desert fighting with their AK-47s, like this could have been anything else. And then the parts where you do see stuff from the Halo universe, like when you see Reach or when you see High Charity, you know, it feels very cool to see it in this TV show setting with this big budget. And I wish the TV show had just more of those set pieces. Actually, looking back right now, I feel like there wasn't many of these big Halo moments, right? Even the reveal of the ring felt kind of weak to me. It would have been cooler if the reveal was more like in the opening of Halo CE, right? They just showed a full ring and you get a grasp of the size with like the ship flying next to it. But I do have to say the show really got the weakest in those episodes where it was just like this desert planet, which is the Kwan episode, which I probably dislike the most. I know most people dislike episode 8 where, you know, Chief gets some action. At the end of the day, at least it was funny in a sense. You know, there was some good memes from that. The episode 7, where it's just Kwan focused, that was just so boring. I just kept catching myself like zoning out and not being able to pay any attention. It feels like sometimes Halo as a universe is just too little in this, and it could have been way, way more. Another point that I think I feel strongly about is this TV show wouldn't have been as hated on if the games didn't suck for the last 10 years. And I know that's a bold statement to make, but if you look at it, the Halo franchise and the Halo community has been, you know, tearing each other apart for the last 10 years, no matter if you like the games or not. And obviously Halo's in a weaker state right now than it was in the glory days, right? So I think the show does get extra negativity just because Halo is also irrelevant as a franchise and the games just do not fulfill people anymore. If you look at other movies like the Assassin's Creed movie, the Tomb Raider movie, or the Hitman movie, the games didn't suffer. The people who liked the games didn't really care. You know, they didn't like the movie, but they just moved on. You know, it wasn't like this big thing. And I think a lot of people just look at this as another 343 failure, which I don't think is fair, because I don't even know how much input 343 had on the making of this. Sure, they were executive producers, but at the end of the day, with like a big budget production, I'm sure there was a lot of people and a lot of ideas floating around. So I think people are extra heated about the show because of the state of the game right now, and I feel like it's not the best show I've ever watched, but it's not the worst thing I've ever watched. It's probably not even the worst video game adaptation I've ever watched. If you ever have seen any of the Uwe Boll video game adaptations like Far Cry, that was, you know, that's how bad we can go, and I don't think Halo's anywhere near that. I am looking forward to Season 2 and seeing what else happens, and I do wonder if they will take some criticism and maybe slow down the pacing. I don't know. Overall, I think the Halo TV show wasn't the worst thing ever. I think it was funny for the memes. Besides a few episodes that were really boring, they could have probably just cut those out. And then, I mean, this is not the worst thing that has happened to Halo in the last 10 years. So, there's that. And I gotta be honest, I'd rather watch 1 hour of this TV show a week than play 1 hour of Halo Infinite a month.
Hey, if you guys enjoyed this video though, make sure you do like and subscribe, and also maybe give us a chance and check out our other videos. We've been trying some content that's a little different from Halo more recently. We did the Skate 3 without skating video. We also forced ourselves to play Anthem for 7 days straight, and that was an experience. But otherwise, that's it for today. Let us know your thoughts on the Halo TV show. We'll see you guys next time with a brand new video.